Welcome back to another episode of the Casey Campbell Podcast. Casey Campbell with you, of course. Pleased to be joined by the man, the myth, the legend, Craig Peterson, otherwise known as the man behind Petey's Picks. How's it going, buddy?
Good, good. That's quite the introduction. I don't usually get that from anyone other than my wife. I think my wife is the only one ever that excited to see me, I feel like. So it's good. Good.
I know a lot of of course, if you've been following, Craig does a lot of the Michigan high school hockey stuff. So you can go check out a lot of where can people, well, I should ask you this, where can people find you?
Sure. PDspicks.com is kind of my home for everything I do, videos, blogs, opinion pieces, picks, that sort of thing. And then obviously I'm available on social media too. PD's Picks, Craig Peterson. Search me on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, you name it. I'm there somewhere, I'm sure. So
Yeah. So let's talk about this season so far. We've had a lot. There's a lot of teams that are off to, a lot of really good starts. But what do you think so far as we have the first few weeks of the season under the belt?
it's always a tough time of the year because you're trying to base a lot off of a little information. A lot of teams only have a game or two games under their belt. Some instances where they've played 3 or 4 games by now, but I think like Orchard Lake St. Mary's played their first game against against Brighton last week. And so you just really you have such a small sample size. So I try not to rush to judgment too much. But I think you kind of know, for me anyways, the benchmark or kind of setting that, I did a preseason top 25. I feel like you can draw some pretty good conclusions based off of what you might have seen from the fall and the MDHL, the MHA, outlets like that, where, gosh, there's a lot of CC kids in the MDHL this year, or wow, Heartland kids looked really good in the MHA. You can kind of start to draw some of those conclusions without even watching any games yet and kind of have an idea of where some of those teams start to fall right out of the gate.
All right.
Yeah.
With us being, of course, let's start. Of course, since I live in Brighton, we have the in Livingston County. We'll start with those three teams, and then we'll kind of talk about the KLAA, MIHL, and then the rest of and we'll preview maybe some other stuff. You never know.
We might sound like homers here a little bit because I'm in Brighton too. So
Right.
this will be fun.
Hey, I went to Brighton, so that's
Okay.
the biggest thing. But I also host two coaches shows in the KLAA. But
There you go.
let's start with Brighton so far. Of course, as you just mentioned, the loss to St. Mary's last week. Of course, they have then they took the Thanksgiving tournament, 2 shootouts with Clarkston and Heartland. And what so far, from afar, what really has kind of stood out to you about them?
So like you, I got to catch Saturday's action from the Thanksgiving Invitational. So I got a up close good look at Brighton there, and I was really impressed. I mean, I think a lot of people have been or will be. Brighton is there's a lot of expectations, I think, around Brighton this year, and I mentioned it a couple times that it's not just Brighton who kind of expects a lot of Brighton. It's people outside of the program who expects a lot of Brighton, which is good to a degree. I think for a coach, for kids within a program, you always have those expectations for yourself. But now when outside influences are starting to have that expectation on you, it can kind of wear on you and put a lot of pressure on you, I think. So I think there's a lot of pressure around the Brighton program this year, unlike previous years, maybe because of that external influence. I was happy to see the way they looked at the Thanksgiving Invitational because they looked in midseason form to me. Cam Duffney is the real deal, looked like the best player on the ice, may even be the best player in the state, if you want to go that far. Truly looked dominant, looked even sharper than what I saw from him in the fall in the MDHL, like I was talking about. So he's really starting to round out and look like a complete player. On top of that, they've got great depth up front. Tim Peterson, a freshman, scored his first goal. That's an exciting moment.
Yep.
For him to have come in and have an impact is maybe a bit, maybe not surprising, but you're not expecting to get that type of production from a freshman at a program like Brighton. Charlie Birchfield, Marika Lent, like there's a ton of options up front. Lane Petit, It's kind of an endless list of scoring options there up front. Defensively, they looked smooth. I didn't see, there isn't really like that standout stud anchor on the back end for them like they've had in previous years, but I think the unit in totality is pretty strong. And then obviously you've got two goaltenders in Nickerson and Penela who have seen it all, done it all already at the high school level. So it's going to take a lot for those goalies to then kind of be surprised or overwhelmed in any way. So again, they've just been really impressive, I think, right out of the gate, and look to be maybe even a little bit ahead of schedule in terms of, as a coach, you're implementing systems and kind of getting pieces in place as the season unfolds. To me, they looked pretty sharp right out of the gate, which is good to see.
Yeah. Okay, let's go to Heartland next. Of course, you got a chance to see them as well as I did. I was also at the Thanksgiving tournament, but and obviously Heartland lost a ton from last year, and what there's a lot of the young talent that's going to be there that's going to really carry them through. But what do you think so far? Because it's a team that's only going to really improve as we go along.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right there. Rick Gadwa is a guy I love. I have great conversations with him.
Yep.
And I've told him, we talked briefly after the weekend. I told him, I was like, you guys made some mistakes. It looked kind of out of sync at times. Guys zigging when they want to zag, like just kind of off a little bit at times. The rhythm was kind of off, but they're so talented and so deep that it kind of makes up for some of those deficiencies. And you're able to kind of overcome pucks hopping over your stick, or a bad break the other way and you give up a goal. You have enough skill there to kind of make up and get that goal back. So for them to what was it, they beat Clarkston, is
Yes.
that right? First game they beat Clarkston is a hell of a team too. For them to beat Clarkston.
Oh wait, no, they beat Forest Hill Central.
That's right. Okay. But
Yep.
did it in dominant fashion, right? I believe it
Yes.
was a 5-1
Yep.
game.
5-1. Yep.
Forest Hill Central, another team who's young but tough to play against.
Yeah.
So for Heartland to put a good number up on them, beat them pretty handedly, I think says a lot. And then ultimately to not even have your best night in a rivalry game with a packed barn against Brighton, and to be a tie game down the stretch and basically lose a coin flip. I think that says a lot about Heartland, how they might not have all the pieces in place and still ironing out some of the kinks, but even on an off night, they're still able to compete with Brighton, who is probably one of the top two teams in the state.
Yeah, and there could be there's obviously two more matchups that Brighton and Heartland will play against each other. So we'll have to see how those two go. Let's talk about Howell for a second. Howell's off to their best start they have been in 5 years. It's looking like get some big wins early on, but it's an experienced group. They went out and got somebody, and they went out and with Andrew Cly coming into the fold, and obviously with Keith Robertson being added onto the staff. What do you think? What do you think the Highlanders are looking like this year?
Sure. It's so I haven't gotten eyes on them yet this season. Obviously, we'll see them plenty throughout the schedule as it unfolds. But I know there's a lot of excitement similar to that kind of excitement or expectation around Brighton. I think there's a lot of excitement around Howell. As you mentioned, this could be one of their best teams in the last couple of years. Rocky is obviously excited about that group. He's excited every year, but it seems a little different this year because it's not just Rocky that's excited. There's outside influences saying, "Hey, man, have you seen these Howell kids? Hey, this Howell kid looks really sharp." Cade Catlin, some of those guys that'll certainly have a big impact this season. So they look really strong to me. It could be a sneaky one. I mentioned, Rocky and I spoke at the KLAA Media Day, and I had written about, little brother might not be so little this year in Livingston County, and how Howell could potentially compete with the Brightons and Heartlands of the KLAA. And he kind of laughed. He was like, "Yeah, little brother, like that's the narrative we play, man. Like we're fine playing that card and being the little brother who sneaks up and steals some wins that people might not expect." So I think that's absolutely going to be Howell. And it's not it's a team that I think if a couple things break their way, could compete and flirt with a KLAA championship, even in the midst of Brighton being the strongest they've ever been, Heartland being super talented. If Howell can steal a game or two in some of those big matchups in a home game, it's there's potential and there's opportunity for that to happen. And then, you shift your focus to the state level. And I believe all three of those teams so happen to have it. All three are in different regions. A lot of things could break Howell's way that way too. And you could end up with a pretty intense quarterfinal matchup potentially with one of those teams, a semifinal matchup where you have like that Livingston County rivalry. It could be pretty special. So Howell is one a lot of people are high on. I am too, and kind of excited to see where they can take it.
Yeah, because we'll obviously get to that when we preview the divisions and all that. Let's talk about the rest of the KLAA. What stands out to you there? Obviously, we got the two remaining West teams with Novi, with obviously a program I'm very familiar with the interviews I've had with Dane and all that stuff. Of course, this is his first year. Northville with Ryan Osamacher in his second year over there. And then, of course, you look at what the East is doing with the three PSEP schools with Canton, Plymouth, and Salem, Livonia, Stevenson, and then of course, the newly christened Livonia Stallions, Livonia Stallions, I should say.
Yeah, I think the KLAA West is probably the single toughest division in high school hockey this year. We mentioned the big three. Northville is really strong just in year two already under Coach Osamacher. Some really nice pieces there. I know they brought in a couple AAA kids this year to kind of strengthen up. Their back end is super strong. They got a couple nice pieces there. So I expect a lot from Northville. I think I mentioned at one point, what did they were one I could see winning 6 or 7 more games than they won last year. I think they could flirt with like that 17 to 18 win total because I think they'll be that strong. And then, Novi isn't really a team to sleep on either. Novi's got a bunch of young talent with potential there. But the East, I think I might need to walk it back a little bit. Initially, I liked Salem out of the East. I had maybe not necessarily written off Stevenson. I just knew Stevenson was going to be really young this year. I believe they're the youngest team in high school hockey with one senior on the roster. Derek Buchanan is the lone senior, so I think it's going to be a really short senior night this year. But so I don't want to say I've written Stevenson off because I know they're competitive year in and year out under Dave Mitchell. But I just thought they might struggle a little bit, growing pains, learning systems, competing against a really tough KLAA and non-conference schedule. So I did kind of give the nod to Salem there, but Stevenson just upended Salem. I think it was 2-1 last week. So as young as Stevenson may be, as much as they might experience some of those growing pains, probably still the front runner to win the East, which is going to put them in the KLAA conference championship game. Whoever they get between Heartland, Brighton, Howell, whoever, like I'm not going to rule out Dave Mitchell in a championship game. So especially the way he can get those kids to play. They're tough, scrappy, hard-nosed, aggressive forecheck year in and year out of Stevenson, regardless of how talented or how young or whatever their deficiencies may be. I'm pretty confident that they'll get made up for in systems and structure and really be able to get up and down the ice with just about anybody in the conference.
Yeah. Let's I want to talk about Plymouth a little bit too. What second year under Brian Dallas. What's that kind of been like to kind of see them in year two?
I got to be honest with you, I haven't seen much of Plymouth, and not a roster I'm super well versed in, I'll say yet, because again, it's one of those teams that, whether it's the Adam Mitchell showcase here in 2 weeks, some of the public school showcases, the MIHL showcase, like Plymouth is usually in the mix with a lot of those big events. So I know I'll see them at some point, just haven't seen enough yet, but I did see a 2-1 win over Saline there on opening weekend. That says a lot. I know, I coached at Saline the last couple of years. I've coached with Kyle Zagata for a number of years, so I know what's there in Saline. So for Plymouth then to come in and beat them in a close game like that, I think says a lot about what Plymouth can be. So definitely, I think a lot of promise there, and building in the right direction. I wouldn't necessarily, talking about Salem, talking about Stevenson as we already have. I don't know if Plymouth is quite there yet to compete with and maybe take down upend Stevenson and try to win the East there. I think it's still probably Stevenson's to lose now at this point. But I wouldn't rule it out. Probably be a lot closer this year than it has in previous years.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about the MIHL. What I mean, that conference is is loaded right again. With Brother Rice and CC and Orchard Lake St. Mary's and all those teams. A Jesuit as well. What are your thoughts about what that league could look like this year?
I think the MIHL could be the most competitive it's been in a long time. CC obviously has dominated for the last couple of years, but I think the gap is closing a little bit, not just in the conference, but across the state. I think Brighton is a team that can skate and compete with CC. Heartland, maybe if they get their ducks in a row and can really fine tune their structure and systems and everything, Heartland could be in a position later on down the road this season where they could compete and contend with a CC. I wouldn't rule that out of the picture. But then just as far as the MIHL goes, U of D is really strong this year. I think they've got a ton of forward talent up front. Carter Kate, Tommy Angel, those are all guys I liked in the fall that stood out to me. They brought in Paul Terrio, who was a AAA kid last year. So there's a ton of weapons up front that I think gives them enough firepower if it turns into a track meet with CC, that I think U of D could kind of keep pace with them pretty well. Brother Rice got a shot at CC last week and obviously didn't go their way. CC with a pretty dominant win there and the biggest rivalry in high school hockey. I thought Rice got bullied a little bit, got pushed around a little bit. It looked like a pretty significant gap between CC and Rice in that game. But with it being so early in the year, it's one of those things. High school hockey is kind of about when you play them, not how you play them. And I think that rematch later on down the road, Rice could sharpen things up and look a little better in the rematch there, because I know, Roman Valaire might not have had his best night. Johnny Coons might not have had his best night. Turner England and net might not have had his best night. Like, I'm sure all those guys want plays back or want a second chance at, a play here or there that could have made the difference and changed the outcome of that game a little bit. So I expect Rice to compete and contend a little bit better than maybe they showed a week ago.
Yeah.
Cranbrook has taken some steps. I like Cranbrook and where they're heading under Coach John LaFontaine. They've taken some steps. Probably not quite to CC's caliber, but they're moving in the right direction and are going to be a tough out for just about anybody in that conference too. So
Yeah. Let's talk about, with what the divisions possibly could look like as as we really kind of head down. We'll start with Division One. Obviously, when they changed all the divisions last year, I think a lot of people were excited to see, with Heartland and Stevenson moving up to D1 and, to compete with Brighton and CC and all those teams. What do you think Division One could possibly look like? Because, I've talked about this with the coaches and there could be a possible collision course, possibly with Heartland or Howell or, even Clarkston too. Could be, Clarkston and Heartland are in the same region again. You got Novi and Northville in the region with Brighton. So they kind of the regions are a little different than last year. What's D1 looking like for you?
I need to do a bit of a deep dive in the Division One, Division Two, Division Three breakdowns. I haven't analyzed it, broke it down as much as I'd like to so far, but last year with the restructuring and everything, it felt like a little bit of reshuffling the deck chairs. And at first it didn't feel like a whole lot had changed. We had just kind of moved some pieces around and nothing real significant came from it. But now that we're kind of into year two of it and starting to see, obviously CC and Brighton were the two big ones in Division One, but now you're seeing Heartland there in the mix, Howell there in the mix, Stevenson there in the mix, Clarkston. I've talked glowingly about for the last couple months because I think they're in a position where they could contend at the state level and be in the mix there in the Final Four in Plymouth. So, you're talking 6 or 7 different teams right there with a legitimate shot at making some noise in Division One. And it's not. I don't know that Division One is the strongest of the three, but I think it's stronger than it's been in the last couple of years. Which then, to me, maybe I got to eat my words there a little bit because the shuffling of the deck chairs did in fact make D1 stronger. And maybe just over time it'll start to develop and continue to grow and get better from there. So that's what you want to see. I mean, hockey is so unique. It's not like football. It's not like basketball where Division One is significantly better than Division 8, or for instance, right? The state championships were over the weekend. I don't think you're ever going to see Ubley go in and beat Belleville in football, but you will see Hancock, a Division 3 team, go in and tie Heartland, who's a Division 1 team. Like, those types of games happen all the time in high school hockey. And that's why it's hard for me to really tier these teams out based on enrollment. So it's tricky as far as the playoffs go. But ultimately, like I said, the restructuring and everything that they did last year, I do think it's starting to help a little bit. Hopefully changes continue to happen and continue to improve the playoffs even more than what they've already been, because I do think you at the end of the year, you want to know that your Division One champion is the best team in the state. And I think that's pretty obvious over the last couple of years that people would say CC is the best team in the state. But there's been a lot of years where people have said D3 is the strongest, and no, D2 is the strongest. Like, it should be pretty clear cut every year that D1 is the strongest, and it hasn't been that way for 6, 7, 8. It's been a long stretch. So the more changes we can make to kind of improve the system overall and get the best programs into one playoff system, I think would be best for the game and best for everybody involved. So I think we probably went off on a tangent there a little bit with playoff talk, but playoffs are something I love to talk about. So
well, let's Division 2. What's that looking like?
Division 2 could be a little wide open to me. I mean, I like Byron Center a lot. I think they've come back maybe even stronger than they were last year, which is kind of hard to fathom given that they graduated 2 of maybe the top players in the state last spring. But Byron Center to me would probably be my favorite at the moment. But Rice, defending champs, I don't really want to write them off just because of the one, I'll say, bad outing with CC. Rice will be in the mix. Trenton is always there. Like, I do think Division 2 is probably where the door is widest for someone unsuspecting to come in and win, right? Where you're not expecting, CC and Brighton, the pretty obvious names there in Division 1. Division 3, you look at Flint Powers and some of those names that are kind of a little more obvious. D2 to me feels a little bit more wide open there at the moment.
Yeah. All right. Now to D3.
Man, you're going to make me pull up lists and stuff here because I don't want to say something stupid and start talking about a team that's not actually D3 anymore. But D3, there's a team I've liked a lot. There's probably a lot that has to happen or go their way in order to make it happen. But I like Grand Rapids Catholic Central to be kind of in the mix there somehow, some way. It won't be easy, right? You're going to have some other teams there for them to even get to that point. East Grand Rapids is another one I like a lot. EGR brings a ton back from last season, who went to the state finals already. But GRCC is one to me. They've got a pretty high-end goaltender there in Trent Goheen. They got a pretty high-end forward there. Braylon Outwater, I believe, is his name. Or am I getting him mixed up? Anyways, okay. The couple high-end forwards there up front too. Plus they brought in Liam Ten Harmsel on the back end. He was a AAA defenseman as recently as last month. So they've got really high-end pieces at all 3 levels of their roster, which I think at the Division 3 level is enough to kind of put you over the top, put you over the edge. But like I said, it won't be easy just to get out of the West side when you have to go through a team like EGR who's been there and done that and has that experience. So yeah, GRCC is kind of the team I'm hung up on there in D3.
All right. Let's talk about some of the upcoming matchups, this weekend. And we have quite a bit of them. What are some matchups that you're really kind of paying close attention to?
You're catching me a little early. I haven't quite put together all my games of the week that I like to put out there.
Yeah.
There is one I got circled. Obviously, I've kind of dubbed it the War of the Woods. Forest Hill Central, Forest Hills Northeastern, I believe, play Saturday. That's always a fun one to me. Kind of the crosstown rivalries. From what I've heard about the West Side, almost every game is a rivalry in some way because all these kids grew up playing together. They all know each other. So there is kind of that Brighton Heartland feel, for instance, right? Which we got to see on Saturday, where those kids grew up playing together in Livingston County. A lot of these kids grew up playing together in Grand Rapids in the youth hockey system over there. So Central, Northeastern, kind of an obvious one to me. That's one I got circled for the weekend for sure.
All right. Well, Craig, thanks as always for the time. We'll talk to you soon throughout the year.
Thank you much. Appreciate you having me on. This was great. Anytime we can talk hockey, I'm all for it. So